Hey, what's going on? All right, so a lot of people are asking me, I talk about these ionic heaters, and I just explain to you, and you pretend like you know what I'm talking about. You don't really know. So I'm going to do a video on this, and this is truly amazing stuff. They're all over the place. U.S. has got them. Russia's got them. Ukraine's got them. Actually, Russia's in Ukraine trying to get theirs. It was actually Russians at one time. Netherlands got them. They're all over. And now they're on ships and on barges. And so I'm going to talk about there's patents on these things. They've been used. You can look all this stuff up, but people just don't understand what they can do. And so I thought maybe I can do a little video here and tell you the things they do, examples of what they do, what you can look up if you want to look the stuff up. First of all, if you want to learn about any of this weather modification, go to climateviewer.com and then look up weathermodificationhistory.com. 100 years of patents. And Bill Gates is using this stuff, okay? This stuff is being used by governments, by corporations, and if you go to Colorado and you ski today, you're skiing on stuff that was made, not by the little snow machines that you see blowing water. They're done by cedars. And this video won't cover that. There are at least 10, 12 different ways of how they modify the weather. We're just going to do this one here. This one is unbelievable. Okay, they're called ionospheric heaters. Okay, and so what they do is they're very powerful. They start off with very powerful high frequency, and they shoot it way up into the atmosphere, ionosphere, and what it does, it heats it up, and it could move it. Okay, it displaces it, and then of course things happen electrically where they use the ionosphere to change the frequencies and things like that, and that's what we're going to talk about. So Haarp, Haarp. That is in Alaska. It was built in 1994, and the government used it for a lot of projects. They sold it. Now, we're going to get into that whole thing. That's going to blow your mind about what happened right before Fukushima with Haarp and why they sold it, and we'll get into that one. And so Haarp is just one of these. Now, there's one at the Netherlands that's like a million times stronger than our little Haarp one that we have that now the University of Alaska owns. Well, first thing they do is, why do they have these things? Why do they use ionic heaters? And so they use them for a lot of reasons. We're going to start off with one, and we're going to go through all 5 or 6 of these. One, it's called space weather control. I know that sounds crazy, but what they did with space weather control was these are actual operations. Operation Argus, Operation Hardtack, Starfish Prime, and Operation K. The K was the Russian one. And what they did there was in 1958 to 1962, I don't know if you guys follow the Cold War, but they blew up hundreds of atomic weapons on the ground, below ground, and in the sky. And these were the ones they did in the sky. They blew these things up in space. Nuclear weapons in space between 1958 and 62 until, of course, our president told them to stop, okay? And Kennedy, in 1963, they passed a treaty where they banned all that, and it didn't end well for him, did it? And so they detonated these, and what they did is they blew these things up in the Van Allen belt, and they created artificial radiation belts. And the reason they did that, we'll get into that in a minute. But what they did is they blew these things up in space, okay? And then what they would do is, if you could do that in space, then you could shoot frequency into it. And we're going to get to that. Project Westford, okay? Project Westford was right around this time, actually a little bit later. And this is an embarrassing one that our government did. And they basically shot 480 million very, really small needles, into the sky, 2 different rockets, and the thing failed. And most of them came back down, and they're like littering the North Pole. They don't tell you about this stuff. And that experience, what they want to do is have those needles floating around in space, which they're up there. And then what they do is they shoot microwaves into them, and then things happen when you heat up particles of space. You can move jet streams. You could change weather with that. Well, that was an experiment. It didn't work, okay? And it was just a bad one. So then they decided to, ever since then, Kennedy says, hey, no more atomic weapons for you in space. And then he disappeared, right? So what they started doing, they're like, okay, we won't use weapons. We'll just shoot plasma. And so they started seeding space with plasma. This is stuff that's patented. This stuff is documented. This is not a conspiracy. I'm not making this stuff, okay? And so instead of using atomic weapons, he used chemicals. And he would shoot these things into space. And by the way, every time you shoot something in space, you put a hole in the ionosphere. Now remember that. Musk is going to do 30,000 of these. We're going to get into what's putting holes in the ionosphere does to you and me and this planet. It's not good, okay? Well, anyways, they started shooting plasma, and the way they did it was sounding rockets. Now, I said it's 12 things that they use weather modification for. We're going to do 3 of them, okay? We're going to talk about sounding rockets. We're going to talk about ionic heaters, which there's a crazy stuff I'm going to get into here in a minute. And then we're going to talk about space mirrors and reflectors. And they're doing that right now. Just so you know, Bill Gates has a patent on taking weather balloons up in the ionosphere, way up there, and doing this up there, okay? High altitude atmospheric conditioning, okay? That's one way with weather balloons, okay? Or the other way is the way they've been doing it, and they're still doing that. It's called sounding rockets, okay? Sounding rockets basically shoot up, do their thing, and they come back down to Earth, and sometimes they reuse them or not. So they're creating plasma membranes up in the atmosphere with chemicals with sounding rockets. They would shoot these rockets up in the atmosphere, and then they would hit them with microwaves. And I'll tell you in a minute what those things do. And here's what they're shooting up in there with these sounding rockets. They're using strontium, aluminum, lithium, barium. I'm using notes, and oh boy, let me plug my phone in. And okay, all right. Well, if the phone dies, it dies. And they were using calcium and sulfur. And what Bill Gates is going to use is sulfur, and that's what he's talking about now. They're talking about doing this above the pole, so they can like reflect the sun. They're gonna shoot sulfur up there to reflect the sun, called cloud dimming, and we'll do a whole other video on that. So basically, they're called artificial cloud ions. Okay, and what they do then is once they get this up there, they get these seeding plasma clouds up there. Then they hit them with microwaves with the ionic heaters, and when that happens, they can move the jet stream. They can move, change temperatures. They can do all kind of stuff once you can get up in the upper atmosphere. So those are sounding rockets, and then they would use Haarp along with that. Now, we'll talk about some of these countries, what they've done with this. The Ukraine, they did a test, and what happened is, and this is where they basically the Ukraine has several ionic heaters, and they used to be Russian. And let's think about one of them. We'll talk about Chernobyl, but why do you think Russia they want these things back? They use them, and so Ukraine has a couple of them. They used one, and what they did is they burned a huge hole in space. Okay, and there was the ionosphere. Now remember, when you burn a hole in the ionosphere, it doesn't fix itself. And the other thing that happens is that it lets solar winds come in, and those are just like, they're not good for us. Okay, solar winds screw up with the magnetics of the Earth. They screw up with the Schumann resonance, is how our bodies work. They screw up our minds, just like the moon does to kids. So kids get crazy on a full moon. And so what they've done is they put a hole in there into the ionosphere, and it changed the weather. Okay, and so this is stuff that you can look up. Now there is one other Ukraine unit called the Russian woodpecker. Now the reason they call it the woodpecker is because if you can listen to it, it sounds like a woodpecker all over the world, and it's located in Ukraine. And now here's the thing with the Russian woodpecker. This is the ionospheric heater. It is connected to the Chornobyl. Okay, to the Chornobyl to the reactors. Now let's think about this. Russia was experimenting with this stuff. Okay, and what they did during this time, right before Chernobyl, is they made the El Nino completely get nuts, totally act differently. We're talking like, it hasn't acted the way it has for hundreds of years. And they were doing this using the woodpecker. And then all of a sudden, the Chernobyl had a meltdown. Now, the Chernobyl reactor 4 was connected to the woodpecker ionic heater. Why? I don't know. I'm not going to get into all that, but maybe they were doing bad things and somebody caused that meltdown. Okay, because you could cause meltdowns. We'll talk about that in a minute. And what happened was, well, actually, they didn't cause a meltdown. What happened was they cut the power. Okay, and when they cut the power to the woodpecker, then they had the meltdown. So something happened. It could have been an act of war that we'll never know. They don't tell us everything. And so we don't know that. Okay. So now we know that it punches holes in the ionosphere. Okay. And let's think about this. If you punch holes in the ionosphere, you could create all kind of problems. What about, warming, global warming, things like that? The next one that is well known is called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. This was another test they did. And what here they would use is two different ionic heaters. I think they would use Haarp, and there's a couple of them, maybe the ICAT, there's a bunch of them. And they shoot them together in the sky, and you create what's called this like aurora, okay, which is kind of a reflector, okay. It's a mirror, space mirror, and they do that using ionic heaters, okay. And basically, it creates this methane, and then that supposedly reflects the sun, right? That's what we want to do: reflect the sun. Cloud. We want to dim the planet so we don't have warming, right? And so that was called Lucy in the Sky. You can check it out, and that's what Bill Gates wants to do. He doesn't necessarily want to do Lucy in the Sky, but Bill Gates wants to use weather balloons. Now, the second thing they use them for is space warfare. Now, space warfare, and you got to remember, do you remember Trump said, hey, Space Force, we're laughing at him. There's a reason for Space Force. It wasn't like a game. The reason is because space warfare, people are building satellites, okay, kamikaze satellites. Think about that. Kamikaze satellites, they hit other satellites, they blow things up. Hijacker satellites, they jump on other satellites, and then laser blinding satellites, okay? And some of these satellites, they can shoot lasers from ships. And so this Trump Space Force, which I think is intact now, is for this because people are going to they have these things, okay? And I'm not going to get into all that. The next thing is the third thing these ionic heaters do is radiation belt remediation, okay? Basically, this is creating artificial auroras. Now, if you can create an artificial aurora, okay, once you do that, then you can shoot ionic heaters into it and you can screw up the energy. And what does that do? They call it EMPs. Now, you remember the EMPs? They try to, and here's where the fake news comes in. They want to say the EMPs during those fires were burning houses and melting cars. I don't know if you remember all that in California a couple of years ago. And that could just be a deflection over what EMPs really are. Like, oh, they're going to have an EMP that's going to shut down all our cars and our radios and our telephones. Well, I don't know about that. That could be the deflection. They deflect propaganda a lot of different ways. So the real reason could very well be because this is a government thing, okay? And it is to mess up with satellites. You could screw up satellites with these things just by creating artificial auroras, okay? And it was called Operation Argus, and all those those operations I talked to you earlier about. They did a lot of tests with that, okay? Basically, this will fry out ballistic missiles, okay, if there's a ballistic missile coming, all right? And so, and the other thing it does is an artificial aurora, okay? And this is kind of crazy. It's hard to understand, but it's called air glow. And what they'll do is they'll suck the radiation out of the atmosphere and they'll create these membranes, okay, like either straight lines or like a whole membrane, like a circular type membrane, and it's radio enhanced. So now you could either shoot into it and bounce off it, or you could bounce from the top out. So they're creating these deflecting shields, okay? This is called radio enhanced air glow. And this is always usually done near the Arctics. Okay, so the next thing is extremely low frequency, ELF or ULF, ultra low frequency. These, the way they use the North Pole, and if you look on weathermodification.com and you look up to where the ionic heaters are, you're going to notice they're all in the upper part of above the earthquake because they like to use the polar. It's called the electrojet, the polar caps to do these tests and experiments that they do. So what they do is they'll shoot this up to the North Pole, above the North Pole. Okay, it's 22.1, so they could change the frequencies, and they'll create what's called a hail, like a hail. I don't know, like an aurora, I guess, or solar reflector. There's different names for it. And then what that does is that it reflects the sun, number one. Number two, they can then shoot radio waves or microwaves into it. And this is the way they probably talk to submarines, okay? So what you want, if you want to talk to submarine, you got to create some type of something to deflect a radio signal so you can go down to the water, and then the submarine knows you're trying to talk to it, and then it comes up to the top of the water, and then you could talk to them. And so they use this, and whenever you look up Haarp, they're always saying, "Oh, it's for submarines." I already give you like 5 things it does, okay? If you want to extrapolate on this, it gets pretty crazy. And so now they use these extremely low frequencies all above the North Pole, and that's why Haarp was in Alaska. But guess what? They realized they don't need the North Pole anymore. They could put this on ships and use the equator, and they do it a little bit differently with the equator. Okay, they actually go higher up into the magnetosphere. I don't know how to say that word, magnetosphere, and they use that whole layer to do their reflecting. Okay, and so now, they sold Haarp, but they also took something out of Haarp. We'll talk about that in a minute. Before they sold it, and they sold it to the Alaska University. Okay, so now these things are on boats, and they're shooting stuff up into the sky. Okay, they're heating the ionosphere. They're creating mirrors, reflective mirrors, and then they're using them for a lot of things. Now, one of the things they use them for is, and they do this with airplanes too. So you don't just need, you don't just need sounding rockets. What they'll do is they'll put the stuff in planes in the fuel, like aluminum, barium, aluminum oxide, barium, strontium, and then the fuel, the exhaust they have particles in complete combustion, and it'll create these systems. And now they'll create an entire membrane. Okay, it might take a couple hours, and then they'll shoot into that. And what they do with that is they'll shoot frequency into it, and whatever bounces back off the earth, they could find tunnels. They could find different types of aquifers. Okay, how do you think our president found? I don't know which president found it, but how do you think they found lithium? Our president's going to be mining for lithium, okay, and on government land here. They find all this stuff with this, and tunnels, and they could find like hidden bases and things like that. So it's kind of like subsurface interface radar, but it's not. It's almost like that, but different. So they put these things on ships now. So they're called mobile ionosphere heaters. Okay, they put them on boats and they use them around the equator or anywhere in the ocean. And so, sure, they can use it for submarines. So when the submarine comes up, it can shoot its atomic weapons, whatever. And that's basically for military purposes. All right, and so the next thing they can use it for, and this is what all the conspiracy people talk about, is they call it mind control. Well, sure, you could do mind control, but you need to extrapolate that. So if you could create extremely low frequency or ultra low frequency, and then bounce it back down in certain groups, and they've done these tests, it can change the psyche of a certain area. So if you had like a fight, like a couple bad guys hanging out somewhere, and you're having a war, you could hit them with this stuff, and it could do things to them and change their electrical body. You can't control their mind, but you can cause psychological disorders, emotional distress. So and you got to think about this. If they could do this to a whole town simply by using ionic heaters and using a solar reflector, or they can create some type of aurora. or they can use aerosol injection from planes, from aerosols, bounces stuff down and mess with our psyche. Yeah, think about the stuff we don't know about that's classified. Okay, so that's where the mind control comes in. But they don't control your mind. They can cause distortion to your mind. And when they do that, see, we live on what's called a Schumann resonance, 7.83, and I got a whole video on that. Check it out. But what this does is when they do this, they get rid of that. Okay, they get rid of our normal Schumann resonance, which is the Earth heartbeat. Our bodies work on a Schumann, and they could bump it from 7.83 hertz to 60. Now that puts our mind into this excited state, and it could do a lot of things. So yes, they can not control your mind, they can mess with your mind. Okay, and so the next thing they do, and then this is they create what's creating I'm using, I guess, some notes here, creating artificial ionospheric mirrors. Okay, I know we talked about mirrors; they're all different. These are done. We talked about plasma, all right. And so once they create these plasma mirrors, which they could do many different ways, sounding rockets, aerosol injection, they could use other ionic heaters together, and do that whole methane thing. What happens is once you have this, now you could bounce off. You could create a plasma mirror at an altitude, okay, somewhere. Then with Haarp, you can use Haarp for that, Haarp or an ionic heater. Then you could have a transmitter, any kind of transmitter. So you want to transmit a message to a ship. You fly over, shoot the stuff with a plane. Wait a minute, hit a transmitter, hit that, bounce it off, talk real quick to somebody on a ship. Nobody hears it, goes away, it's over. Okay, so you could do secret messaging that way. You could track radar that way. You find airplanes that way. You can, if you want to find airplanes, low-flying airplanes, you could do that doing this, okay? And so that's creating artificial ionospheric mirrors. Now, they've taken this to one more step. So instead of using Haarp to create these plasma mirrors in the sky that they're going to bounce things off, they can do this with spacecraft, and they could do it with high-altitude jets, okay? So now the jets, they use lasers, and they shoot down at a certain elevation, create the plasma, okay? Or they create the mirror, and then below we could bounce off that mirror and do things with it. This stuff is crazy, okay, what they're doing. They use lasers on planes. You can look all this stuff up. And, of course, you could probe underground structures, tunnels, resources, look for minerals. Okay, now, here we go. Now, if you can do all that, and now if you can, so let's think about this. You got a plane up there, okay, or not, or you use an ionic heater. Let's say we use a plane, and he creates a mirror, space mirror, and then we shoot up into that mirror, okay, with an ionic heater. It bounces off, and we point that to where we want to point to. Well, guess what? We can point that, and at 25 hertz, I think it can out-induce an earthquake. Yeah, we're talking man-made earthquakes. Now, this is crazy. They try to tell you that somebody blew an atomic weapon in the ocean, which created the tidal wave or the tsunami, which caused the Fukushima meltdown. Okay, you want to believe that? That could be the conspiracy. You got to understand, this guy named Steen wrote the book on how to deal with conspiracies, and one of them, and Obama hired him, one of them was that you create a fake conspiracy along with the truth and mix everybody up. So like you could say, the moon is a spaceship or the earth is flat. It's all this crazy stuff, right? These conspiracies are crazy. They throw them out there just so you don't know the truth. So now this is the truth. The NASA Goddard the Space Center in Maryland picked up heat anomalies right above Fukushima, 3 days before. And there's no possible way that was a natural thing. So it heated it up. Everything heated up there, okay? And they have this on record. This is the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, and the Fukushima Daiichi meltdown. And you could actually look at the temperatures of the sky above there, and guess what? It was something that was never done before. You never see this, but then on that date, you have the tidal wave, and you have meltdowns. Okay, so here's the thing. What came first? You have to think about, who came first, not the, egg or chicken, but did the earth shifting and fracturing heat the atmosphere before the earthquake, or did the atmospheric heaters heat the atmosphere, which caused the earthquake? Think about it. I mean, I'm not telling you that that's what happened, but it's something to really think about. Okay, we're never going to know that. And the thing today is that was it was a 2.5 hertz signal that was up there, and they picked this heat anomalies up. All right before it happened, and then oh, by the way, oh, here's the big thing. By the way, Haarp Ionospheric Heater was on and active during the Japan earthquake, doing testing. Then right after the earthquake, it shut down for 3, 4, or 5 weeks. Then it's called the magnetometer. The magnometer. Okay, magnometer. I can't read my writing. They took that out, so we'll never know what they used. And then he sold the whole place to Alaska University. Now they're sending signals to Jupiter and stuff. But we don't need it anymore because we could just do it from ships at the equator. We got these things moving all over the place now. And so they're getting really good at this ionospheric heaters, man. And so was that an act of war? Was that a test? Was Chernobyl a test? I mean, and here's a great example. You can look this up. The Chinese had the Chinese Olympics. They didn't want to spend money. I talked about this in other. Hey, how you doing, Aunt Quinn? And what they did is they didn't want to spend money on the stadium roof, right? So instead, they seeded the clouds, and what they did is, I didn't seed the clouds. I'm sorry. They modified the weather, and it didn't rain at all. And they told everybody how they were going to do it. They're doing it. The Chinese are doing it now because they're stealing water and they're growing in the desert. We'll get into this. I'll do a whole video on this. I'll do a part B to this, okay, with all that, and we'll get into the how they steer the water. We talk about 3 ways. We talk about sonic rockets. We talk about space mirrors and ionic heaters, okay, and I probably could elaborate a lot more on it. But the bottom line is, okay, the way ionic heaters work is they shoot frequency into the sky. They cook the sky, and by cooking the sky, they change it. They move jet streams when they cook the sky, and they can create membranes, like reflective membranes, that we could bounce signals down back to Earth or from space out. And so they can be used for a lot of things, okay? And they're not just used to talk to submarines. I mean, they're used to find oil under the ocean. They're used to find. I mean, I'm sure Elon Musk is using them, and for his tunneling, and I'm sure Musk and Buffett are using them to hide and store natural gas underground. I'm sure the government uses it because they got some tunnels, they go places. I'm sure that other countries use it where they make things under mountains and they hide things in mountains. This stuff can find all that because they have technology. They can talk to things underwater. They can see things in the ground. They can see things up in space. They reflect things. They can reflect the sun. They can make it snow. They can make it rain. They can change the hurricane direction. They can wipe out a hurricane. It's insane. It's insane. And so we'll just call this part 1. And I'll do another part 2 with the other 7 weather modification. I would recommend that I'm not using any visual aids or PowerPoints because I don't like to spend too much time on these right now. But if you want to learn a lot about it, there's some great stuff on weather modification. I'm sorry, on weather modification history. That's it. .com or .org, and then climateviewer.com, or you can just look up the expert Jim Lee. He's been doing this for a long time. He has the best website on this stuff, and you can learn a lot about this. There's also other sites that have a lot on weather modification. There's a lot of companies that are doing it. I please rate, subscribe, share. Also, in about a year, I'll have some. I got a book I'm working on, but it's got nothing to do with this. The book's more about your home and how you could be healthier in your home. It's going to be a really good book, and I'll put a link down below. Also, I have other products like this looks like a crazy hat, right? But it's really a Faraday cage. If you were to put a telephone inside this hat, no signal would come in or come out. It's made out of lead and some other metals. It's pretty expensive, and I will give a link down below. It might look better on you because I got a big fat head, but I'll put a link down below. You can buy it. It's expensive. I paid like 40, 50 bucks for this thing. But if you put a phone in this, it won't ring. It'll stop. Any signal won't come to your head. It's kind of like a tin hat, but I don't wear it all the time. But I'll have a link down below. So hey, thanks for coming on. Please rate, subscribe, and also I have a service for people with home issues. That's what I do for a living. I've been doing it for 40 years, 18,000 home inspections. If you have a house problem, you want me to solve it, I can do usually on the phone. Small fee. Just Google, call Marko, M-E-R-K-O, call Marko with a question. And then it'll give you my number, and you'll get like 15 minutes. We'll figure out your house problem. So, hey, thanks for coming on.